The alarm's buzz cut through the pre-dawn silence at 5:30 a.m., same as it had for the past 20 years. Robert Mitchell's hand found the clock by muscle memory, silencing it before the second beep. His feet hit the cold hardwood floor of his Denver apartment. No heated tiles, no plush carpet, just honest oak that creaked with age. The narrow bed behind him was already made, military corners he'd learned from his father. Above it hung the only photograph in the bedroom. Sarah, laughing in a field of wildflowers near Breckenridge, her hair caught mid-breeze. 15 years gone, but her presence still filled the small space like sunlight through gauze curtains. Robert shuffled to the kitchen, past furniture most people would haul to Goodwill. The coffee maker was older than his son's pilot career, sputtering and hissing like it might give up any day, but it still brewed a decent cup. As steam rose from his chipped Broncos mug, he glanced at the mail scattered across the laminate counter. Bills, mostly. A flyer for senior discounts at King Soopers, nothing that screamed 48,000 monthly salary. What those bills didn't show was the direct deposit that hit his account every month, enough to buy a house in Cherry Hills Village outright, drive a new Tesla, wear suits that cost more than some people's monthly rent. Instead, he drove a 2014 Honda Civic with a cracked side mirror and shopped at Target when things went on clearance. His neighbors probably thought he was just another retiree scraping by on Social Security, maybe a small pension if he was lucky. Mrs. Chen from 3B always tried to give him her Costco coupons. Young Travis from the ground floor had once offered to mow his portion of the shared lawn. "For free, Mr. Mitchell. Seriously, don't worry about it." The truth was more complicated. As regional director of Rocky Mountain Renewable Energy, Robert oversaw wind and solar farms from Colorado to California, managed budgets that could fund small cities, and sat in board meetings where single decisions moved millions. But when he came home to this modest two-bedroom apartment on the unfashionable side of Capitol Hill, he was just another guy in faded Levi's and flannel shirts from Walmart. His phone buzzed on the counter. Not a ring. Dan knew better than to call this early. A text message lit up the screen. "Dan, Dad, you awake? Need to talk. Important." Robert set down his coffee, a small knot forming in his chest. His son didn't text at 5:45 OCM unless something was wrong. He called. The phone barely completed one ring. "Morning, Dad." Dan's voice carried warmth, but underneath it ran a current Robert recognized from years of single parenthood, the tone his son used when he was about to ask for something uncomfortable. "Hey, kiddo, you're up early for a pilot. Thought you had the Salt Lake road today." "Canceled. Weather system moving through. That's actually—" Dan paused, and Robert heard a woman's voice in the background, soft but insistent. "That's not why I'm calling." Robert waited, taking another sip of coffee. Sarah had taught him this. Sometimes silence was the best question. "Tori's parents are in town this weekend." Another pause. "They want to meet you." "That's nice. I'd like to meet them too." "Yeah, the thing is," Dan's voice tightened, "they're pretty successful. Business owners, restaurant group, 8 locations across Colorado, the whole thing." Robert set his coffee down carefully. "Uh-huh. They're good people, Dad, really generous, but they have, standards. They're kind of particular about—" The sentence died, unfinished. "About what, Dan?" "Just, could you maybe wear something nice? Your good shirt, the blue one?" There it was. That knot in Robert's chest pulled tighter. His 32-year-old son, an accomplished airline pilot who landed planes in crosswinds that would terrify most people, was worried his old man might embarrass him. "Sure, son, I'll dust it off." "Thanks, Dad. I knew you'd understand." Relief flooded Dan's voice. "We're meeting them Saturday evening, 7 o'clock at the Broadmoor in Colorado Springs. I'll text you the details." The Broadmoor. Robert knew it well. He'd hosted corporate dinners there, signed million-dollar renewable energy contracts in their conference rooms, stayed in their suites when entertaining clients from the West Coast. But Dan didn't know that. To his son, the Broadmoor was probably an extravagance, the kind of place you went to impress important people. "Sounds good. I'll see you then." "And Dad?" Dan's voice softened. "Thank you for understanding. I know I just want everything to go well." After they hung up, Robert stood in his small living room, looking at the worn furniture, the basic television from 2019, the walls bare except for 3 photos, his wedding day, Dan's college graduation, and that picture of Sarah in the wildflowers. He'd built this life deliberately, raised Dan to understand that worth came from character, not bank accounts. His own father had been a union electrician, his mother a nurse. They'd taught him that money was a tool, not an identity, something you used to build security and opportunity, not something you wore like a badge. But now his son was embarrassed by him, worried that his poor father might not measure up to his fiancée's successful family. Robert walked to the window, watching dawn break over the Denver skyline. The gold dome of the state capitol caught the first light, gleaming like a promise. Somewhere in those streets were homeless veterans, brilliant kids in underfunded schools, families choosing between medication and groceries. He'd lived that life once, before Sarah's encouragement pushed him to finish his engineering degree at night school, before the promotions started coming. He'd spent 4 decades in business, and he'd learned something important. You only see people's true character when they think you're beneath them. When they believe you have nothing to offer, no power to wield, no influence to grant. A slow smile spread across his face as he finished his coffee. The Harrison family was about to meet Dan's father. They had their expectations about successful business owners and simple working men. Robert had 5 days to prepare. They had no idea what was coming. The research began Tuesday afternoon. Robert pulled up his laptop. Nothing fancy, just a Dell Inspiron he'd bought 3 years ago at Best Buy, and started digging into the Harrison Restaurant Group. Their website was polished and professional, 8 locations across Colorado, from Denver's Cherry Creek to Vale Village, family-owned since 1987. The usual corporate language about excellence in hospitality and serving communities with pride. Photos showed upscale casual dining, exposed brick, Edison bulbs, craft cocktails with artisanal garnishes. But it was the local business journals that painted a clearer picture. The Denver Business Journal had featured them last year, annual revenue approaching $12 million, steady growth, expansion into resort markets. Richard Harrison had started with a single diner in Pueblo, a story Robert read twice, making mental notes. "We ate government cheese and wore hand-me-downs," Richard was quoted saying. "I worked 3 jobs to save enough for that first lease payment. Patricia was pregnant with our daughter, and we knew we had to build something that would last." So they weren't trust fund babies, self-made, like Robert. That complicated things. He found more. A feature in 5280 magazine from 3 years ago called "From Food Stamps to Fine Dining, The Harrison Story." The article included a photo of young Richard and Patricia, maybe mid-20s, standing outside their first restaurant. Richard's suit was too big, probably borrowed. Patricia wore a dress that looked homemade. Both had the hungry, determined look of people who'd fought their way up from nothing. The article mentioned something else, buried in the 3rd paragraph. The journey wasn't without setbacks. Patricia's family had different plans for her. They'd hoped she'd marry into Denver's established society. When she chose Richard instead, the rupture was permanent. "My mother didn't speak to me for 8 years, Patricia Harrison recalls. Not until after our daughter was born. Some people never saw past Richard's background." Robert leaned back in his chair, processing this. The Harrisons weren't simple villains. They were people who'd been judged, rejected, fought against. And now they were on the other side of that equation with their own daughter about to marry. The question was, had they learned from their experience, or had they become the very people who once hurt them? He bookmarked several articles, memorized key details. 8 restaurants, 37 years in business, daughter Victoria, Tori, according to Dan, who worked as an event coordinator for a luxury hotel chain. Then he pulled up his work email on his phone, something he rarely did at home. There in his pending reviews folder sat a familiar name, Harrison Restaurant Group. Their energy contract was up for renewal in 90 days. Standard commercial account, $28,000 monthly for electricity across all 8 locations. Nothing unusual, except now it wasn't just a contract. It was leverage. Robert stared at the email, a plan forming. He forwarded it to his CFO, Maggie Chen, with a brief note. "Maggie, hold this renewal. Don't process until I give the go-ahead. We'll explain Monday. Also, if anyone from Harrison's calls asking questions, route them through me first. R." Her response came within minutes. "Rob, what's going on? This isn't like you." He typed back, "Meeting a potential client's family this weekend. Just want to be prepared." "Prepared for what?" Due diligence. Her next message was a single emoji, the eyes looking sideways. Maggie had worked with him for 12 years. She knew when he was up to something. Wednesday morning, Robert dug through his storage closet, hunting for clothes he hadn't worn in decades. There, behind boxes of Christmas decorations and old tax returns still kept out of habit, he found what he was looking for, his original work shirts from the wind farms. Faded blue cotton, permanent stains from hydraulic fluid near the left pocket. The name patch had been removed years ago, leaving only ghost stitching and a slight discoloration. The fabric was soft from hundreds of washes, worn thin at the elbows. The boots were there too, Timberland steel toes that had seen real weather, real labor. He tried them on. Still fit, though they felt strange after years of business casual and the occasional suit. The bathroom mirror showed him a different man, someone who worked with his hands, worried about overtime, counted every dollar. It was like stepping back in time, back to who he'd been before the promotions, before the corner office on the 16th floor with views of the Front Range. He practiced walking in the boots, remembering the slight hunch he used to carry from long hours bent over equipment. Softened his voice, added hesitation where confidence used to live. It felt like method acting, preparing for a role. His phone rang. Dan again. "Hey, Dad, wanted to give you more details about Saturday." "Sure, shoot." "The Harrisons are—" Dan paused, choosing words carefully. "They're really impressive people. Richard owns those 8 restaurants, and Patricia basically runs operations. She's got her MBA from CU Boulder. They're smart, sharp." "Sounds like it." "They've got a house in Cherry Hills Village, drive matching BMWs. Dan's voice dropped. "I want them to like you, Dad. I want this to go well." Robert felt a surge of sadness for his son, tied in knots trying to bridge 2 worlds. "Dan, anyone worth knowing will like me for who I am, and anyone who judges me based on what I drive or where I live isn't worth worrying about." "I know, Dad. You're right. It's just, this is important to me. Tori's important to me." "Then I'll be on my best behavior. Promise." After hanging up, Robert sat in his kitchen, wrestling with doubt. Was he being unfair? Maybe the Harrisons would surprise him. Maybe they'd see past appearances, treat a retired maintenance worker, or so they'd think, with genuine respect and warmth. But Dan's words echoed. Impressive people. Cherry Hills Village, matching BMW. I want them to like you. The subtext was clear. His son was already apologizing for him, already worried that Robert wouldn't measure up. That told him everything he needed to know. Saturday arrived cold and gray, typical November weather in Colorado. Robert dressed slowly, deliberately, the old work shirt, faded Levi's that bagged slightly at the knees, the Timberlands with their scuffed steel toes. He grabbed his simplest wallet, black leather worn thin at the fold, containing exactly $43 in cash, and his basic debit card. Hidden behind that debit card, barely visible unless you were looking for it, was another card entirely. Black metal, heavy, with his name embossed in silver. Robert Mitchell, Rocky Mountain Renewable Energy. But that one would stay hidden for now. The drive to Colorado Springs took 90 minutes down I-25, mountains rising ahead like ancient sentinels. Robert drove in silence, no radio, using the time to settle into character. He wasn't Regional Director Robert Mitchell anymore. He was Rob, the retired maintenance guy who'd fixed wind turbines for 30 years and now lived on a modest pension. The Broadmoor rose before him like something from a different world. Manicured lawns stretched in perfect lines, fountains sparkled under evening lights, and the circular drive was a parade of luxury. BMW, Mercedes, Lexus, a few Teslas. His Honda Civic looked like a rust bucket among thoroughbreds. He parked in the farthest corner of the lot beside a service entrance. One last check in the rearview mirror. Work shirt, weathered face, humble posture. Perfect. The lobby hit him with a wall of warmth and wealth. Italian marble floors, crystal chandeliers that probably cost more than most people's cars, and the soft murmur of money. Guests glided past in designer clothes, women in dresses that moved like water, men in blazers with that perfect fit that screamed tailored. Their conversations drifted. Ski season in Aspen, wine collections, second homes in Scottsdale. Robert felt every eye catalog him, file him away under doesn't belong. "Dad!" Dan's voice cut through the ambient piano music. He approached quickly, Tori beside him. Robert's son looked sharp in a navy blazer, crisp white shirt, no tie, the kind of casual elegance that took effort to look effortless. Every inch the successful pilot, but his smile seemed forced, shoulders tense like he was bracing for impact. "You made good time," Dan said, not quite meeting Robert's eyes as they shook hands. Traffic was light. Robert turned to Tori, extending his hand. "You must be Victoria. Dan talks about you constantly." She shook his hand briefly, her grip polite but distant, the kind of handshake you'd give someone's gardener. "Nice to finally meet you, Mr. Mitchell. Please, call me Tori." She wore a cream-colored dress that probably cost more than his monthly grocery budget and pearl earrings that caught the light. Pretty girl, Robert thought, poised. But there was something calculating in her eyes as they swept over his work shirt, his boots, his general appearance. "My parents are already at the table," she said, gesturing toward the restaurant entrance. "They're looking forward to meeting you." They walked through corridors lined with oil paintings and fresh flower arrangements that were replaced daily. Other guests nodded at Dan and Tori, ignored Robert completely. He might as well have been invisible. The help, maybe, trailing behind. The restaurant was all dark wood and soft lighting, tables spaced for the kind of private conversations where deals were made and futures decided. Near the windows overlooking the golf course sat a couple who had to be the Harrisons. Richard was a big man, probably 60, silver-haired and confident in a charcoal suit that fit like it had been made for him, because it probably had been. He had the bearing of someone used to being the most important person in the room. Patricia sat beside him, elegant in an emerald silk blouse and tailored black pants. Her jewelry was understated but expensive. Small diamond studs, a simple gold necklace, a Cartier watch. She looked up as they approached, and Robert watched her face change. The welcoming smile flickered. Her eyes swept over his clothes, his boots, his calloused hands. The assessment was quick, thorough, and unmistakably dismissive. He saw her exchange a glance with Richard, a whole conversation in that split second. "This is Dan's father?" "Apparently so." "Well, this will be interesting." "Mom, Dad," Tori said with practiced brightness, "this is Dan's father, Robert Mitchell." Richard stood, extending his hand. His grip was firm, businessman strong, but brief. "Robert, pleasure to meet you. I'm Richard. This is my wife, Patricia." "Please call me Richard," he said, smile not quite reaching his eyes. "We're informal around here." Patricia offered her hand like she was bestowing a favor, barely touching Robert's fingers before withdrawing. "How lovely to finally meet Dan's father. We've heard so much about you." The maitre d' appeared, guiding them to their seats. Robert ended up in the chair facing away from the windows, the one with a slight wobble that the others had probably learned to avoid. The rest settled into plush seats with perfect sightlines of the mountains, now purple with twilight. "Beautiful evening," Robert said, looking around. "This is quite a place." "We come here often," Richard replied, settling his napkin with practiced ease. "The Broadmoor maintains certain standards. We appreciate that." Patricia smiled. "It's important to surround yourself with quality, don't you think, Robert?" The menus arrived, leather-bound, heavy, written in elegant script. No prices listed, which meant they were expensive enough that if you had to ask, you couldn't afford it. "The wine list here is exceptional," Patricia said, flipping through pages. "We're actually thinking of adding some of these selections to our restaurants. We just expanded to location number 8. "Started with nothing," Richard added, pride evident in his voice. "One little diner in Pueblo, built it into something substantial." He paused. "Dan mentioned you used to work in energy? Wind farms, was it?" "Yes, sir. Maintenance mostly. Honest work, nothing glamorous." "Honest work." Richard repeated the phrase like he was tasting it. "That's respectable. Takes dedication." But his tone suggested otherwise. Takes dedication the way sweeping floors takes dedication. Necessary, perhaps, but not particularly noteworthy. The sommelier appeared, presenting the wine list to Richard with a subtle bow. Patricia leaned in, whispering about vintages. Dan and Tori exchanged glances Robert couldn't quite read. "Can I start you with cocktails this evening?" the waiter asked. Young guy, maybe mid-20s, name tag reading James. Richard ordered a Macallan 18, neat. Patricia chose a Pinot Noir from a bottle that James nodded at with respect, the kind of respect that meant expensive. Dan and Tori followed with craft cocktails, names Robert didn't recognize. "And for you, sir?" James turned to Robert. "Just water for me. Ice water's fine. A pause. Brief, but there. James nodded and disappeared. The silence at the table felt heavy, broken only by the soft sounds of silverware and conversation from nearby tables. Robert could feel them assessing him, adjusting expectations downward. The poor relation. The embarrassing father-in-law-to-be. Richard cleared his throat, leaning forward slightly. So, Robert, tell us about yourself. The question hung in the air like expensive cologne, and Robert knew this wasn't curiosity. This was an interview. Time to give them exactly what they expected to see. The question hung between them, waiting. Robert folded his hands on the white tablecloth, letting a moment pass before answering. Around them, the restaurant hummed with quiet wealth. Well, he said, keeping his voice humble, I spent most of my career doing maintenance work, energy facilities mostly, wind farms across Colorado and Wyoming. Started when I was 23, worked my way up to supervisor eventually, retired about 5 years back. Richard nodded slowly, already categorizing. Wind energy, that's growing these days. Clean power, good for the environment. I was lucky to be part of something meaningful, Robert agreed, even if it was just keeping the equipment running. James returned with drinks, placing them with practiced precision. The Scotch amber and crystal, the wine breathing in an expensive glass. Robert's ice water looked pitiful beside them. Patricia lifted her wine, studying Robert over the rim. It must have been challenging, raising Daniel alone after Sarah passed, all that physical labor and a young son at home. We managed, Robert said simply. Sarah taught us to live within our means. She was practical that way. She sounds like she was a wise woman, Patricia said, though the way she emphasized practical made it sound like a limitation. It's so important to understand financial realities. The appetizers arrived, delicate arrangements that looked like art. Robert had chosen the house salad. Richard's oysters sat on ice with gold leaf garnish. Patricia's burrata came with heirloom tomatoes and aged balsamic. So you're retired now, Richard said. How's that treating you? The fixed income situation? There it was, the first real probe. I get by, Robert said. Don't need much. Keep the thermostat low in winter, shop the sales. You learn to stretch $1. Patricia made a sympathetic sound. Denver winters can be brutal. The heating costs alone must be significant for someone on a pension. I manage fine. Of course you do, she said quickly, but it must be a concern. Health insurance, unexpected expenses. She paused. Do you still live in the same place you raised Daniel? Same apartment, Capitol Hill area. Richard and Patricia exchanged a glance. Capitol Hill, the old neighborhood, before it got trendy. Dad's always been independent, Dan said, his voice tight. Independence is wonderful, Richard cut in smoothly, but we also believe in family supporting each other. That connection, that willingness to help. Patricia leaned forward. Actually, Robert, that's something we wanted to discuss, about family and support. We've been very fortunate in our business, Richard continued. 8 restaurants now, solid revenue. And we believe when you're blessed with success, you have a responsibility to share it. Mom and Dad are incredibly generous, Tori added softly. We were thinking, Patricia said, that perhaps we could help ease some of your concerns. Monthly support, nothing extravagant, but enough to ensure you're comfortable. Maybe $500 or $600? The amount hung in the air. Carefully calculated, enough to sound generous, not enough to actually change anything. That's very kind, Robert said slowly. But I couldn't accept charity. It's not charity, Richard said firmly. It's family investment. Think of it as investing in Dan's peace of mind. He paused. You understand how demanding a pilot's schedule is, the pressure, being responsible for hundreds of lives every flight? I do. We'd hate for him to have additional worries, Patricia added. Financial concerns about family, feeling obligated to help, having to split his focus between his new marriage and other responsibilities. Robert felt the pieces clicking into place. This wasn't about helping him. This was about removing him from the equation. In return, Richard continued, we just ask that you give them space. Let Dan and Victoria establish their marriage without feeling obligated to check on you constantly. Young love needs room to breathe. Dan's jaw tightened. Dad doesn't need... Sweetheart, Tori interrupted smoothly, they're trying to help. We all want what's best for everyone. James appeared with main courses. Richard's ribeye looked expensive. Patricia's Chilean sea bass came with elaborate garnishes. Robert's chicken breast was the most modest option. Think about it practically, Richard pressed. 600 a month, maybe 7. That's real money for someone on a fixed income. Could make the difference between struggling and living with dignity? Living with dignity. As if dignity could be purchased. Patricia dabbed her lips. We're not asking you to disappear, Robert, just to understand that Dan has a new life now, a wife who deserves his full attention. That's very generous of you, Robert said finally. I'll need to think about it. Richard raised his glass, satisfied. Of course, take all the time you need, but remember, pride is expensive. Sometimes the wisest thing is to accept help when it's offered. The conversation shifted to lighter topics, but Robert could feel the weight of their judgment. During a lull, Patricia turned to him. By the way, Robert, what exactly did you do at those wind farms? Was it electrical work or mechanical? Both, really. Whatever needed doing. The turbines are complex. Electrical systems, hydraulic components, structural integrity. You have to understand how all the pieces work together. How fascinating, she said, though her tone suggested otherwise. The energy sector is so crucial. Our restaurant's electricity costs have been quite concerning lately, $28,000 monthly across all 8 locations. Robert's hand tightened imperceptibly on his fork. $28,000, their exact contract amount. That's significant, he said carefully. It certainly is, Richard agreed. We're actually meeting with our energy provider next month, Rocky Mountain Renewable Energy, to discuss rates. With expansion plans, every dollar matters. Patricia nodded. We've been reviewing all major contracts, energy, food suppliers, equipment, looking for better terms. Competition keeps everyone honest, doesn't it? Robert felt the pieces shifting. They didn't know. They had no idea that the energy provider they'd be negotiating with reported directly to him, that their contract renewal sat in his pending folder right now. That's smart business, he said mildly. Always good to review your contracts. Exactly, Richard said. That's how we've built what we have. Attention to detail, willingness to make tough decisions. He looked directly at Robert. Sometimes you have to cut ties with arrangements that aren't serving you anymore, no matter how long they've been in place. The message was clear. The monthly support came with strings, and if Robert didn't play along, those strings would be used to tie Dan away from him. The stakes had just gotten much higher. The main courses sat before them, half-eaten testimonies to wealth that didn't require cleaning your plate. Richard had taken perhaps 4 bites of his steak. Patricia's sea bass lay artfully deconstructed. Robert's plate was nearly empty. Tori set down her fork with a delicate clink. I'm absolutely stuffed. The portions here are always so generous. Too generous, Patricia agreed. We always end up taking so much home. She glanced at the table, then at Robert. Something shifted in her expression, a decision being made. She raised her hand. James materialized. Excuse me, Patricia said, her voice carrying. Could you please box up all these leftovers? James nodded. Of course, ma'am. All of them? Yes, please. She turned to Robert, her smile benevolent. Robert, you should take these home. There's no sense wasting good food, and this probably cost more than you'd normally spend on groceries in a week. The restaurant didn't go quiet, but Robert felt attention shift. Heads turned, eyes found their table. The couple nearby, the woman in designer black, her husband in expensive casual, looked over. The woman's gaze traveled across Robert's work shirt, his weathered hands. She leaned toward her husband, whispering. Robert caught fragments. So sad. At least they're helping. Mom, Dan said, his voice strained. That's not necessary. It's absolutely necessary, Daniel, Tori interrupted smoothly. Your father probably appreciates not having to worry about cooking for days. Don't you, Mr. Mitchell? All eyes at the table turned to Robert. James stood frozen. The neighboring couple had abandoned pretense. A passing server slowed. Even the sommelier paused. This was the scene they'd choreographed. Public charity as performance. That's very thoughtful, Robert managed. Thank you. James moved with visible discomfort, scraping expensive remnants into foam containers. Richard's barely touched steak, Patricia's designer fish, even the untouched bread rolls. We always take care of our family, Robert, Richard said, his voice carrying across the dining room. That's just who we are. The words landed like an announcement. Look at us feeding this poor man. Two more tables turned to look. A woman in pearls whispered to her companion. Robert watched James's hands shake as he sealed the containers. The young waiter's embarrassment was acute. He'd probably never had to package leftovers for someone's charity case at the table. "There you go, sir," James said quietly, placing the bag beside Robert's chair. The containers clinked together like coins in a beggar's cup. "Now you won't have to worry about meals for days," Tori said brightly. "Isn't that wonderful?" Wonderful. As if being handed scraps was a blessing. The woman at the next table stared openly now, whispering to her husband, "Must be so hard for the son, having to worry. Hope they're giving him money too." Dan looked like he wanted to disappear. His hands were clenched, knuckles white, jaw tight, but he said nothing, did nothing. Just sat there while his fiancée's family publicly degraded his father. Robert saw it all, the shame in his son's eyes, the satisfaction in the Harrisons' expressions, the pity-soaked judgment from strangers. "The thing about family," Patricia continued, "is that we support each other through difficult times. Some people are too proud to accept help, but real family doesn't let pride get in the way of practical needs." Richard nodded. "That's wisdom. Pride can keep a man hungry when there's food on the table. Better to accept kindness than suffer in silence." Robert felt cold fury building, not explosive, but glacial. The kind that waited and struck with precision. He looked at the doggy bag, at his son's mortified face, at the Harrisons' self-satisfaction, at the strangers with their pity. They thought they were good people, generous people. They had no idea what was coming. James returned with the check presenter, a black leather folder placed beside Richard's elbow with reverence. Through the transparent pocket, Robert could see the total, 1,847.50. Richard reached for it with easy confidence, the confidence of a man who'd never had a card declined. "This one's on us. A family celebration." He pulled out his wallet, Italian leather, probably Gucci, and selected a platinum card, the kind with no preset spending limit. He slid it into the presenter without glancing at the total, already checking his phone. Patricia smiled at Robert. "Please, let us take care of this. It's our pleasure." James took the presenter and disappeared. The table settled into silence. Richard typed on his phone. Patricia touched up her lipstick. Tori scrolled Instagram. Minutes passed, 2, 3, 5. When James returned, Robert saw the change immediately, concern mixed with embarrassment mixed with dread. "I'm very sorry, sir," James said quietly, "but this card has been declined." The table went silent. Richard looked up sharply. "That's impossible. Try it again." James's discomfort was palpable. "I did, sir. Twice. Same result." "There must be a system error," Richard insisted, his face reddening. "That card has a very high limit." Patricia leaned in, whispering urgently, "Try the business account card." Other diners were noticing. The couple who'd witnessed Robert's humiliation now watched with fascination. A passing server slowed. The sommelier paused mid-pour. Richard fumbled through his wallet, producing another platinum card. "This one's connected to our restaurant accounts, much higher limit." James took it reluctantly and disappeared. Longer this time, when he returned, his face told the story. "Sir, I'm very sorry, but—" "Declined," Richard finished flatly. The silence was deafening. Dan stared at his hands. Tori's smile had frozen. Patricia whispered desperate suggestions. Richard stood abruptly. "I need to call the bank. This is clearly a mistake." He walked toward the lobby, voice carrying, "Yes, this is Richard Harrison." Followed by, "What do you mean, insufficient funds? That's impossible." Patricia sat frozen, composure cracking. Tori wouldn't meet anyone's eyes. Dan looked caught between mortification and something like satisfaction. At the neighboring table, the woman who'd pitied Robert now whispered to her husband. Robert could read her lips. How embarrassing. The tables had turned. Now the Harrisons were the spectacle. Richard returned, face pale, jaw tight. "There's some kind of issue with our accounts. I don't understand it, but—" He looked at Patricia, at James, then finally, desperately, at Robert. The moment stretched, and Robert reached for his worn wallet. Everyone watched as he opened it slowly, moved past the basic debit card. His fingers found another card hidden behind it. He pulled it out and placed it on the tablecloth. Heavy, black metal, the weight of corporate power. His name embossed in silver. Robert Mitchell, Regional Director, Rocky Mountain Renewable Energy. James's demeanor changed instantly. His eyes widened with recognition. He'd seen fewer than 10 of these cards in his career. His posture straightened. "Of course, Mr. Mitchell," he said, his tone transformed. "I'll process this immediately, sir." Patricia stared at the card like it was a snake. Richard's mouth fell open. Tori looked between the card and Robert's face, horror dawning. Dan blinked, speechless. James returned in 60 seconds. No delays, no drama, just quiet efficiency. "Thank you, Mr. Mitchell. Would you like the receipt?" "Please." The transaction had processed instantly. On D750, approved without resistance. Robert took the receipt, folded it carefully, and placed it in his wallet beside the black card. Then he looked up at the stunned faces around the table. "Actually," he said, his voice calm and measured, "there's something you all should know about me." The table held its breath. The neighboring diners leaned in. Even the piano seemed to soften. The revelation was coming. And the Harrisons were about to learn that the man they'd spent the evening humiliating wasn't just Dan's father. He was the person who controlled whether their restaurants had power. The silence at the table was absolute. Even the ambient restaurant noise seemed to fade, or maybe that was just the weight of the moment crushing down. "I'm not exactly a retired maintenance worker," Robert said, his voice conversational, almost casual. "I mean, I did retire from maintenance work. That part's true. But that was 30 years ago, not 5. Richard found his voice, though it came out strangled. I don't understand." "I'm the regional director of Rocky Mountain Renewable Energy," Robert continued calmly, letting each word land like a carefully placed stone. "Have been for the past 18 years. Before that, director of operations for 12 years. Before that, assistant director for 6. I worked my way up from maintenance supervisor over a 40-year career." Patricia made a sound, small, airless, like she'd been gut-punched. "Dad?" Dan's voice was barely audible. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" Robert turned to his son, his expression softening. "Because your mother and I made a promise before she died. We wanted you to grow up understanding that a person's worth isn't measured by their salary or their job title. We wanted you to respect people for who they are, not what they have." He looked back at the Harrisons. "My salary is $48,000 per month, before taxes. That's just under $600,000 annually, not counting bonuses or stock options." Tori made a choking sound. The woman at the neighboring table's eyes went wide. "But here's what you should find particularly interesting, Richard." Robert leaned forward slightly, his voice still calm but carrying an edge now. "Your restaurant group uses quite a bit of electricity. 8 locations, industrial kitchens running 12 hours daily, walk-in freezers and coolers operating around the clock, HVAC systems, lighting." Richard's face had gone from red to white, understanding beginning to dawn like a terrible sunrise. "Your monthly energy bill averages $28,000 every single month for the past 3 years. Robert paused, letting that number hang. "I personally review and approve all commercial contracts over $25,000. The silence deepened. Even the piano had stopped. "You see," Robert continued, "you're not just having dinner with Dan's father tonight. You're sitting across from your energy supplier, the man who signs off on keeping your lights on, your freezers running, your restaurants operational." He watched the color drain completely from Richard's face. "In fact, you're one of our most valued commercial clients. I've probably signed a dozen contracts with your company over the years, reviewed your payment history, always on time, I'll give you that. Your contract comes up for renewal in 90 days. He pulled out his phone, showed them the email. "See that? Right there in my pending folder." Patricia's hand went to her throat, her fingers finding her necklace like a lifeline. The aftermath settled over the table like fallout. Patricia's mouth opened and closed, no sound emerging. Richard stared at Robert like he was seeing a ghost. Tori had gone completely pale, her perfect makeup suddenly garish against her bloodless skin. "Robert," Patricia finally managed, her voice trembling, "please, we had no idea. We misunderstood. We were only trying to—" "To what?" Robert interrupted, his voice still calm but now edged with steel. "Humiliate me? Buy me off? Control my relationship with my son?" Richard stood abruptly, his chair scraping loudly. "You set us up," he said, anger breaking through his shock. "You deliberately deceived us. You came here dressed like that, acting like you were poor, letting us think—" "I gave you a chance to show who you really are," Robert cut him off. I dressed like a working man. You decided what that meant. You decided I was worth less. You decided I needed your charity and your doggy bags. This isn't fair, Tori said, tears starting to stream down her face. You tricked us. Robert turned to her, his gaze unflinching. No, Victoria, I showed up as myself, just not the version you expected. You and your parents made every assumption after that, every judgment, every condescending comment. That was all you. James hovered nearby, uncertain whether to stay or go, but clearly riveted by the drama unfolding. We grew up poor, Robert, Patricia said, her voice breaking. Food stamps, hand-me-downs. Richard's family lived in a trailer. My mother cleaned houses for the wealthy families in Denver, and they treated her like she was invisible. Richard sat back down heavily. We built everything from nothing. We didn't want Tori to struggle like we did. We didn't want her to feel what we felt. So you became the very people who hurt you, Robert said quietly. You learned to judge others the same way you were judged. You took your trauma, and instead of healing from it, you weaponized it. Patricia shook her head, tears now running freely down her carefully made-up face. We were trying to protect our daughter. By humiliating her fiancé's father? By offering him charity he didn't need? By publicly treating him like a burden? Robert's voice remained level, but the words cut deep. That's not protection. That's control. Dan stood suddenly, his chair nearly tipping backward. Dad, I'm sorry. His voice cracked. I'm so sorry. I let them make me ashamed of you. I sat here while they gave you leftovers like you were a charity case. I didn't defend you. I didn't stand up for you. Danny, honey. Tori reached for him. No, Dan said, pulling away. He's my father. He raised me alone after Mom died. He taught me everything good I know, about integrity, about treating people with respect, about not measuring someone's worth by their bank account. His voice grew stronger. And I let you treat him like he was nothing. I let you all make me embarrassed of him. He turned to Robert, tears in his eyes. You taught me better than that, Dad. You deserve better than that. Richard looked at his daughter, then at Dan, then back at Robert. The businessman's mask had crumbled completely, leaving behind just a man, flawed, scared, realizing he'd made a terrible mistake. We were wrong, Richard said finally, his voice hoarse. About everything, about you, about what matters. Robert's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, Maggie's name on the screen. Excuse me for a moment, he said, stepping away from the table to answer. Rob, we have a situation. Maggie's voice came through, tense. I just got off the phone with Tom Brennan. The Harrisons' attorney? Yes. He called 2 days ago asking very specific questions about someone named Peter Crawford. Robert's grip tightened on the phone. Peter Crawford was the name I used when I first started at the wind farms, before I changed it back to Mitchell after Sarah and I got married. He was digging, Rob. He wanted to know employment history, salary information, whether this person was still with the company. I told him we had no one by that name currently employed, which is technically true. But Rob, he specifically asked if we had records of a Peter Crawford who worked maintenance in the late 80s and early 90s. He knew exactly what he was looking for. Robert felt the pieces clicking into place with terrible clarity. Maggie, send me everything you have on that call. Every question he asked. Timestamp everything. Already done. Check your email. Robert hung up and returned to the table. Every eye was on him. He pulled up his email on his phone, scrolled through Maggie's message, then looked directly at Richard. That was my CFO, Robert said quietly. She just informed me about a very interesting phone call she received 2 days ago, from Tom Brennan, your attorney. Richard's face went from pale to gray. He called my office asking very specific questions about someone named Peter Crawford. Robert watched Richard's reaction carefully. That was my name 30 years ago, before I changed it back to Mitchell. He was looking for my old employment records, my old job descriptions, my old salary information. Patricia's hand flew to her mouth. You investigated me, Robert said, his voice deadly calm. You didn't just happen to judge me tonight, Richard. You planned this. You found out I was just maintenance, and you planned this entire evening to put me in my place. Robert, that's not... Patricia started. Robert pulled up the forwarded email from Maggie and began reading aloud. Question 1. Do you have any record of a Peter Crawford employed between 1988 and 1995? Question 2. What was his job title and salary range? Question 3. Is there any connection between this individual and Daniel Mitchell's father? He looked up. Your lawyer asked my CFO 13 specific questions about my employment history, 2 days before this dinner. Dan stared at his fiancée's parents, horror dawning on his face. You investigated my father? Behind my back? We were protecting you, Richard said, but his voice had lost all conviction. Protecting me? Dan's voice rose. Or protecting yourselves, or your image, your precious daughter marrying into the right kind of family? Tori was crying harder now. Daddy, you said you just wanted to make sure Danny's father was stable. You said... I lied, Richard admitted, his voice broken. I wanted to know what we were dealing with. I wanted leverage. I thought if he was struggling financially, we could control the situation, offer help on our terms, make sure he knew his place in our family structure. You found my old records, Robert said. You saw a maintenance worker, salary $32,000 annually from 1990, and you never looked further, never checked if I'd been promoted, never asked if things had changed. You just assumed I was still that person, and you built your entire strategy around that assumption. We were scared, Patricia whispered. We've seen marriages destroyed by financial stress, by family members who become burdens. We thought we were being smart. You were being cruel, Dan said. You turned my father into a project, a problem to manage. Robert stood, picking up the bag of leftovers. I came here tonight willing to give you the benefit of the doubt. I thought maybe you'd surprise me. Maybe you'd see past the work boots and the old shirt. Maybe you'd treat a poor man with genuine respect. He looked at each of them in turn. Instead, you proved that success without character is just expensive emptiness. You have money, you have businesses, you have a beautiful home, but you've lost something much more valuable along the way. What's that? Richard asked, his voice barely audible. Your humanity. Robert turned to face them fully, the doggy bag still in his hand, a reminder of everything that had transpired. Richard, Patricia, he said, his voice firm but not unkind. Your energy contract will be renewed on schedule. Standard terms, standard rates. Your loan reference stands. I told the bank you're reliable clients, and that's true. Richard's eyes widened with surprise and relief. But understand this, Robert continued. I'm doing that because I'm a professional, because I don't punish people's businesses for their personal failings. If I did that, I'd be exactly like you, someone who uses power to control and diminish others. He set the doggy bag on the table. Keep your leftovers. I don't need them. I never did. Patricia reached for it, then pulled her hand back as if burned. Robert looked at Dan. Come on, son. Let's go. Dan stood immediately, but Tori grabbed his arm. Danny, please. Don't leave like this. We can fix this. My parents will apologize properly. We can start over. Dan gently removed her hand from his arm. Tori, I love you. I really do. But I need time to think about whether I can marry into a family that treats people this way. We'll change, Richard said desperately. We'll do better. Maybe you will, Robert said. I genuinely hope you do, but that's work you need to do for yourselves, not to win back my approval or keep Dan in your lives. He pulled out his wallet, removed a business card, his real one, embossed and professional, and placed it on the table. If you ever want to have an honest conversation about what happened here tonight, call me. But not to apologize for misjudging my bank account. Apologize for losing sight of what makes people valuable. They walked through the restaurant, past the staring diners, through the lobby where guests stopped mid-conversation to watch. Out into the cold November night, their breath visible in the mountain air. Dan was silent until they reached the parking lot. Then he stopped, turned to his father, and broke. I failed you, he said, tears streaming down his face. I became exactly what you raised me not to be. I cared more about fitting into their world than standing up for what's right. Robert pulled his son into a hug. You defended me tonight. Not as strongly as I'd have liked, but you did defend me. And just now, you made the hardest choice of all. You chose integrity over comfort. I don't know if I can marry her, Dad. I don't know if I can be part of that family. That's for you to figure out, Robert said. But Dan, remember this, People can change. Real change is possible, but only if they want it badly enough. The question is whether the Harrisons want to change or whether they just want to avoid consequences. They stood in the cold, father and son, understanding each other better than they had in years. "What happens now?" Dan asked. "Now?" Robert smiled slightly. "Now we go home. You can stay at my place tonight if you want. We'll order pizza, talk about everything, about your mom, about why I kept my job secret, about what you want your future to look like." "I'd like that," Dan said. "I'd really like that." They got into the Honda Civic. Suddenly, Robert's choice of car made perfect sense to Dan. As they pulled onto I-25 North, headlights cutting through the darkness, Dan spoke again. "Are you going to tell me about your work now, the real story?" "Every detail," Robert promised. "No more secrets." Behind them, the Broadmoor glowed like a palace in the night, and inside, the Harrison family sat at their table, their carefully constructed world in ruins, learning that sometimes the people you look down on are the ones who control your fate. 3 months later, Robert sat in his modest kitchen, reading the Sunday paper. The coffee maker sputtered its familiar morning song. Sunlight streamed through the windows, warming the old hardwood floors. His phone rang. Dan's name. "Morning, Dad. You up for brunch?" "Always. The usual place." "Actually, I was thinking we could try somewhere new. There's this little diner in Pueblo that just reopened under new management." Robert smiled. Dan had been suggesting somewhere new for weeks now. Always small places, local places, the kinds of restaurants that measured success in community, not profit margins. "Sounds perfect. 10 o'clock? "See you then. And Dad? Tori's coming too, if that's okay." Robert paused. "How's that going?" "Slow. She's been in therapy. Her parents too, actually. They started volunteering at food banks, working with families who can't pay their heating bills." Dan's voice softened. "I don't know if we'll make it, but she's trying, really trying. Then I'd be happy to see her." After they hung up, Robert found himself thinking about the letter that had arrived last week. Richard and Patricia's handwriting, actual pen and paper. "Dear Robert, we can't undo what we did. We can only try to become the people we should have been all along. Thank you for the mirror you held up. We didn't like what we saw, but we needed to see it. The restaurants are doing well, the expansion is on track, but more importantly, we're learning to measure success differently. Sincerely, Richard and Patricia." Robert had written back, one sentence. "The only measure that matters is how you treat people when you think no one's watching." A knock at the door pulled him from his thoughts. He opened it to find James, the waiter from the Broadmoor, standing in the hallway, dressed in casual clothes. "Mr. Mitchell, I hope this isn't weird, me showing up. I got your address from—" He trailed off, embarrassed. "From Googling my business," Robert finished with a smile. "It's fine. What can I do for you, James?" "I wanted to thank you," James said. "That night, watching what happened, watching how you handled it, it changed something for me. I'm in law school now, like I mentioned, but I've decided to focus on pro bono work, people who get judged by the system before they even get a chance." Robert's smile widened. "That's good work, James, really good work. It's because of you. Because you showed me that dignity isn't about how much money you have, it's about how you treat people." James extended his hand. "So thank you. For the lesson. For being who you are." They shook hands, and as James left, Robert stood in his doorway watching the young man walk down the hall with purpose in his step. One act of dignity rippling outward, one moment of truth, changing more than just the people at the table. Sarah would have been proud. Robert closed the door, finished his coffee, and got ready for brunch with his son. The Honda Civic waited in the parking lot, still running strong, still perfect for what he needed. Because worth isn't measured by what you drive, what you wear, or where you live. It's measured by how you make people feel when they're standing beside you. And that was a lesson the Harrison family and his own son would never forget.